Alright guys, what's up? Fish here again, or trout. Yeah, so we're gonna go over, I guess, the bull versus bear thesis case. So we talked yesterday's videos a lot about the SMAs and the bearish divergences they were having. So what I thought I would do here is I thought I would just compare, Bitcoin historical drops, what happens during the uptrends. I kind of gonna just do a bull versus bear case here. So we talked a lot about 2019 yesterday, so I guess we'll talk about it now. Just to kind of recap everybody, we talked about how the cycle, the fractal looked a lot like 2019. If you guys don't remember, just go kind of to the middle of that video. We talked about the 2019 fractal and how similar this cycle was playing out, as well as it's a Republican Party cycle and how similar they are. Yeah. So if you look back here at 2018, obviously Bitcoin did about a 70% drop here before it tried to rally up to the 50 SMA and get above it, before doing a 46% rally and ultimately getting rejected and going down to the 300-week SMA. Yeah, so you can kind of see that, you get these large drops from the all-time high, and then it kind of consolidates and tries to get above it and goes back down. That was for 2018. 2019 was similar from the bottom here. It did a little 18% drop mid-cycle, and then or towards the end of the cycle, pardon me, and then it went up and it did a correction about 50%, tried to get above the 50, failed, broke down, and it went and tested a 300-week SMA. So what I want to show you guys is kind of just what happens in these corrections, right? So when you get back above the 50-week and you start your bull market, you usually get about 20%, 30%, a big 50, and then you usually make an all-time high. It goes down and tries to break out on this 52-week SMA, and it just fails, right? And again, you kind of see this pattern. It's like it kind of goes 20%, it goes 30%, it goes 50%, and then it just, this is the start of the bear market once you've, reached your all-time high. But you can always see it kind of does like a 46%, maybe 30%, 20% rally to try and get above this 52-week, where it ultimately just falls on its face and just goes down, right? So with this cycle, you got your 20% similar to how you got, back here. You got your little 18er. You went up, you did 20%. You went up, you did 30%. As you can see, it went 21, 21, 33, 31, right? And right now, you're at about a 29%, which is roughly 30% drop, right? But the problem with now is we're below the 52-week, right? We're late in the cycle. We're in November. Bitcoin usually finds its bottom and goes up in early October. You can see, like, each time it makes an all-time high, we're in the last bit of the year, right? So, like, does this show you? Oh no, it doesn't. That's quarter four here. That's December of 17. That's quarter four November back in 2013. You kind of see like quarter four historically is key, and the only time when it failed to make a new high when it should have was the 2019 year. Right? And we talked about yesterday how that 2019 year has always kind of failed. But again, it looks very similar to how price went up and did its consolidation and whatnot to how this year looks. So if we get this cross, which the 20-week cross and the 50 usually marks the start of the bear market, right? We explained this yesterday. Here's your cross here. That usually indicates a bear market. Same thing here. Same thing here. Historically, this is a very good indicator for showing. It looks like we pointed out yesterday that it looks like it wants to kind of cross, somewhere in this late January, early February range. And again, that's when that 200 week would be crossing the previous all-time high, right? So if we go from the previous all-time high, let's see here, kind of like this, right? We enable our 200-week SMA. I mean, we just extend this out. So if we extend this line out, it actually looks like it kind of wants to top maybe in May, maybe April, that kind of general range, right? If we were to kind of go off that trend line here, if we go from the wick and not the bar, maybe it's a little higher into June. So there's that study yesterday where I showed you guys where the 200-week usually shows when it crosses the previous all-time high, that is the market top. So we have this issue now. We're going into a death cross, but it kind of shows that the cycle wants to go further. Problem is with this metric, is if we go off this wick here to here, see last year, the last cycle was actually delayed, right? The top was here, but the trigger went off here. So we have this kind of weird scenario now where price is bad, looks awful, right? We've just done a 30% drop in the last, few weeks, exactly a month to be fair. And, if Bitcoin's going to go do a bigger correction here, how deep does that go, right? So, if we were to get another, 50% drop, that would take you down to 60K, right? And that, like we got that last cycle, but it went to the 52-week, right? If we got a, 50% drop like we did here back in 2022, I would argue that everything's over, right? Bitcoin's never lost the 52-week and then got above it and just started a whole new thingy, right? So, I mean, there's a first time for everything, but it looks weird, right? It looks weird. And we went over the USDT dominance study, right? The USDT dominance study yesterday as well, and we showed that this blue regression channel, this blue parallel channel, has marked all the bottoms for BTC this cycle, and it finally broke out of that recently, right? And the last kind of trend line you can make here is up here towards 6.5% if you were to get a bounce. So you'd have to go, I mean, another 0.4% here pretty much. Again, right, it looks weird because we're in this issue now that we're below this. We're looking like we're going to get a big cross here, right? So again, Bitcoin has the chance here to basically bottom now within 2 weeks and come up and test this 52-week SMA. So if we were to come down here, we need, another 12% rally here into that 52-week mark. And that's kind of going to happen quick, right? Because we look historically, when you find a bottom here, get up there, it's 70 days max to do it, roughly, right? Like, let's go back in history here. Same thing here, you go down here, this one got rejected at 20, it took 42 days. So it's less than 90 days you really have to make that rally attempt, it looks like, right? Which just isn't good, right? So I'm not saying that it's over now, but I think people have lost their confidence. So if anyone knows anything here about indices, the DGI monthly here, it's kind of been in this channel here for a really long time, right? And it's pretty close to topping out, right? You can see like in 2017 we got a correction, 2020, 2021. Earlier last year, or sorry, I guess late last year, early this year, we got our correction. We're back up there, and again, you can see where it bottoms, you can see where it bottoms, you can see where it bottoms, and it really does look toppy. And the SPX here, I mean, you can even see the futures are down in the after hours. We're down here 0.3, or sorry, yeah, 0.3%. It was actually at 0.5 a little bit earlier. It was a rough day out there. The Nasdaq's down 0.4. The Asia session, for some of the Asian indices look terrible. There's just a lot of bearish divergence, and we know too on the SPX, it's just a lot of negative gamma divergence, which is not good. The one probability I can see here, if Bitcoin wants to do the magnificent, is this. Every single time it's rallied, these here are just fat single prints, right? They always get filled. Like, you can see here, like, this wick here is filling the single print. This single print here gets filled, right? So you can see, like, the single print here gets filled. It comes back and fills it. It consolidates before going back up. Same thing here. The single prints here, like all these single prints here, consolidates, right? Pushes back up. Same thing here. You get all these single prints and tries to get back above, maybe make a new all-time high, and it doesn't. It's a very common pattern, and this cycle it's played out a lot, right? Like the single print here, right here, still here, right? So the only case I can really see is if these single prints here that we get, is that what it's going to fill here? But that means you got to go down to at least, you know, maybe 80, anywhere from, I would say, 82 to 86K roughly, if you're going to do that, right? So that means that this drop would be, let's go to 82 just to round it. But, oh, pardon me. Call it there. So roughly 35%. Right? So it could be. The only confluence there really is your 100-week SMA is kind of down there. And Bitcoin's never bounced off it before. Right? I guess you could argue it tried to in 2019, but all it did was set a lower high, right? Yeah, so I mean that's the only time it really did, but then it just nuked after, right? And when it failed to do that, it just nuked another, you know, 62, 63%. So again, it's a lot of divergences, right? The only way I can see this bottoms is if for some reason the VIX decides to shoot up this week or within the next 4 weeks. And for those who don't know, the VIX is volatility indicator for S&P 500. If it shoots up, you know, the VIX usually marks a bottom, right? And it's done this before where, you know, you get these huge VIX spikes, but it marks the low, right? You get a spike here, that marks the low. You get a spike here, that marked the low for this year. You know, you get 2 spikes here, these mark the lows. But you can see when you get these VIX spikes above 50, roughly 60, it usually marks the low, right? You know, we could have some arguments for 2008, but I mean, that was a whole different scenario. But again, you can definitely see when it's elevated, though, it's showing that the low is definitely near, right? And this is just a historical factor. It's a great metric. So if we got this, you know, VIX here, where it's actually been curling up, you know, the last few days, there's quite a bit of, I'd argue, bullish divergence in the VIX, which is bearish divergence for the indexes and equities. It is trying to perk up. I mean, you got your perk in August, and it's right now. I mean, you're getting thick green closes above, right? Like the VIX is definitely being bid, and there is some crazy flows for it. I've been tracking it. You know, if we get a 50 or 60 plus spike, does that mark the low? And you know, Bitcoin just does its thing here. You know, tops off these single prints, whatever. You know, it doesn't really matter where you want to put this. You know, maybe somewhere down here, 85, 84K, and you kind of just bounce off, and you get that euphoric swing to the upside that everyone's hoping for. You know, and if you get that upside, and we do top somewhere next year, right, you'd kind of have to do something like this, where you just shoot straight up, right? But that's like a really intense upswing, right? Like we kind of showed that April was kind of the last line in the sand. So you'd kind of have to come in here. You'd really have to shoot up here, right? But you don't have much time to do that. So, I mean, to me, it looks like you're going to get a left translated cycle, right? And I'm going to show both sides. You know, I'm going to show the bearish and the bullish sides, right? So that's kind of the bull case. You kind of have to bounce from there, right? Like you kind of have to come down and bounce. You can't really do anything. And I mean, I guess it's possible, but you are kind of getting, you know, this head and shoulder pattern where you can count this is a shoulder, this is a shoulder. You can go like this, this, this. you know, double neckline here and then just down, right? And usually it does after the top's in. It usually takes about 14 months to bottom, right? So if the top was here in October, you go 14 months from there, the bottom would be in 2027. It'd roughly be December to January of 2027 if my math's not wrong. So from a weekly moving average perspective here, right? The bear case is, are you just going to set a low and then just, get rejected around 100K and then just dip off to the downside, right? Is that what's going to happen? Are you just going to get a low and a fake rally attempt like you have in other cycles, like here in 2022, here in 2019, here in 2018, right? Like, is that what's going to happen, where it just fails to get above and then just, sets a lower high and the head and shoulders plays out and it dips off? It's looking that way. It's not looking good for the bulls, and I'll say that. And it sucks because this really should have been the super cycle if everything was going to be so bullish. Sailors in, we have ETFs, we have government approval, pro-government. But the issue is I think with equities and crypto is too much of the markets have been lifted by debt issuance. And what I mean by that is debt defaulting companies built up on debt, mass lending, and not real confidence, like not real spot buying, not real, safe haven long-term holders. A lot of it's been propped up by just margin and leverage, which I don't think is healthy. And again, like it's been a weak cycle. It's been easy to trade because it's been so just consistent, but it's been very brutal, and especially for alts, right? Like ETH, for example. you know, ETH never even made a new all-time high. If it did on some exchanges, it was just a double top, right? That's 4 years here of a double top, right? And it got rejected at, what is that, 4,000, right? That's 1, 2, 3. It actually got a temporary rejection before going up. The rejection here was, let's see, at roughly 14, 15% drop before finally trying to get above it. But all it did was just double top off the previous cycle's all-time high. And ETH, for example, ETH finally tested its log regression band after not doing it for, nearly what, 4 years? So if it's similar to 2019 for ETH, you were here, and you need to come back up and come back down here. And ETH down here, if you were to get, this droppage below here, ETH still got, let's just pretend the blue line's there. You got to come down and at least sweep around 1K. Here it wicked below. How much did it wick below here? The blue line. Let's take a look here. Whoops. If we were to say from the bottom, that's 45% below the blue line. I mean, I'm not saying that happens. I'd hope you'd get a bounce off of 1K exactly, maybe 800-900. But to come down and get a little wick below to the blue line here, I mean, that's a big drop, right? Like that's a big drop. But it looks so much like 2019, where you kind of just bounced here, you went up, right? Like from this low here, and you went up 340%. From here, 250%. Do you just get this kind of same scenario here? Or, is this the ETH fractal? Right? And it could be. Like, that that looks really similar. And it seems to be following that. So I don't know, guys. Like that's truly up to you to decide what's going to happen. You know, you position yourself how you want it, but it does not look good. Like I said, the SPX has some huge bearish divergences. People are getting margin called. Gamma's very negative. If you don't know what that means, it basically means that the market makers go short. There's not much buying lifting the market. You know, and Nvidia earnings come out on Wednesday, and that's kind of the one thing propping up the market if it's good. But you can't have one stock prop up the whole market. That's not how that works. You know, the housing index looks really bad. You know, if we overlay the housing indexes by the SPX, you know, they follow very close. And the SPX is still up here, but the housing's down here. Right? And you can see how fucking close these follow. Right? You know, maybe 2005 is a little bit of a thing, but again, that was going into the financial crisis, right? So I don't know, dude. Yeah, the bonds look terrible, especially in Japan. Japan bonds look terrible. They're the highest they've been in a while. Of course, this doesn't go back that far, but this is the highest it's been since I believe like the 80s, right? SPX and after hours and pre-market has just always been down the last few days. You know, the last thing I can really say, Bitcoin's time is now. Like Bitcoin has to make a swing like right now. It has to make a swing now, or it's done, right? And we know Bitfinex wants it lower. Bitfinex shorts today even spiked up. They want price lower. You know, and another fractal we can look at here is Zcash. Every time this thing spikes, it always spikes near the all-time high for crypto. And that's what it's doing right now. It does nothing, and it always spikes near the peak. And it's on its pullback. Which, if that's the pullback, then hallelujah. Right? It just gets really volatile. So, I don't know, man. You know, there's some really bad divergences. You know, total 3 for alts never went to the 0.25 range lows. You know, it's still got 42% to drop here if you want to try and get an alt season. You know, and if that marks the bottom, by all means, sure. But I don't see that being the case. Alts don't lead the market. Bitcoin does. Bitcoin is the king, and all alts, meme coins, all bleed back to Bitcoin, right? It's not even just a Bitcoin maxi thing. That is just facts, right? You know, I guarantee the reason retail doesn't come back is because they all put their money in alts, and all alts, you know, went down. The 1010 liquidation that we got recently, it just shows that there's no strength in alts. It's all margin. It's all leverage. There's no strength. So it just looks rough. You know, nothing looks overly bullish. And I mean, you know, maybe you just get this here, where alts are just following this, right? And if you were to break out of this triangle, you know, again, it wouldn't be till like 2027, 2028, right? It's hard to say. But I do think this is a left translated cycle, and I don't think it's good. The bull case has to kick in now. It really has to kick in now. You have credit default swaps rising on a lot of these AI stocks. You know, equities are definitely showing divergences. Like this looks toppy. You know, when price is starting to fail to keep moving up, and you get these drawbacks, and you start to chop, and you really start to, you know, go flat. Like you start going flat like this. Like that's toppy, and you're kind of starting to see that now, right? Like you're kind of starting to move flat, right? Like if you just kind of do this, you know, that's chop. You don't want chop, right? Whenever you get chop, that's not good. You know, again, you can go back however far you want, but when you start getting these choppy zones, that's not good. You don't want that. And Bitcoin has that. Bitcoin definitely has that going on for it. Like that's a lot of chop, right? That's a lot of chop. And sure enough, it's breaking down. from a TPO perspective here too, here's our VWAP. We're below the 365 day. We broke out of this D pattern. We broke out of this D pattern. We broke out of this D pattern. From a TPO perspective, if you guys don't know how to use TPO, you guys definitely should go check out how to use it. It's really helpful for people who are scalpers and looking to make money just scalping trades and finding zones. You can see here, like even on this recent profile here, we're below the point of control, which again is up at that 100K level where the VWAP is. It tried to fill these naked point of controls, these naked single prints. But again, if we go back here, like, remember how I pointed out that lower 80K? Like, look at these single prints that need to be filled. Those are big single prints that need to be filled. This needs to be filled. This needs to be filled. And you can see the point of control is down here at 84 from, earlier this year for this huge profile, right? But these single prints need to be filled, and I pointed that out before. That's a pattern that Bitcoin usually does. Is it goes and fills them, right? So, obviously it got a reaction off of this, but is that the low? Right? Like I think you really have to fill this whole thing. You got to come down to this point of control here if you want a proper bounce to make a run for it. Bull case here. Go up, consolidate, and then brigade bolt to a new all-time high. That's the bull case, right? You want to come to this 52-week SMA, and you basically want to just bounce off it and make a new all-time high, right? You don't want to be trapped under that. The bear case is you come up and touch it, and you get rejected right off of it, right? That's the bear case. So, I don't know, man. You guys do what you want. I've said my 2 cents. I'm not your financial advisor. I don't have a crystal ball. We all get humbled. We all make bad predictions. We all make the wrong trade here and there. It's up to you for you to do what you want to do. And I don't know what's going to happen. So I think it's bearish. Some people call it bullish. I'm cash reserved. I will try and scalp this if we get 84K, but I'm not holding that position with a lot of leverage, and I am not holding that position with a lot of cash. I'll get up here and I'll take my profit. If it goes, great. I'll keep 50% in, but I'm taking those profits. The minute I get stopped out back under 95, I'm out. So that's it, man. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully it gave you guys some insight. But it's a messy one.